कल को
Hello and welcome. I'm Izmir Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US President Donald Trump celebrated a phenomenal victory after Congress narrowly passed his flagship tax and spending bill in a 218 to 214 vote, promising mass deportation, $4.5 trillion in tax breaks, and record military spending, according to media reports. President Donald Trump hails his tax and spending bill as the biggest ever and says it will turn the U.S. economy into a rocket ship ahead of a rally in Iowa for America's 250th birthday, according to U.S. state media. Russia became the first country to recognize the Taliban government, with Afghan Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi calling it a brave decision, but women activists warned it legitimizes a regime that restricts rights and shelters sanctioned terrorists, AFP has reported. US President Donald Trump said that he wants safety for the people of Gaza as he prepares to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu next week to push for a ceasefire, according to media reports. US President Donald Trump said his call with Putin made no progress on the Ukraine war. Meanwhile, Russian strikes later hit Kyiv and eastern Ukraine, killing 5 people, according to media reports. India's Minister Kiren Rijiju declared that only the Dalai Lama and his Garden Phondrang Trust can choose his successor ahead of his 90th birthday, rejecting China's claim to approve the next Tibetan spiritual leader, according to media reports. At least 6 people, including a 3-year-old boy, have died and 30 are missing after a ferry sank between Java and Bali, Indonesia. According to reports, over 300 rescuers with boats and helicopters have resumed searches now after 8-foot waves hampered earlier efforts. Wildfires in Turkey's Izmir province have killed 2 people and authorities evacuated 50,000 people and damaged 200 homes, as a little-known group called Children of Fire claimed responsibility for arson attacks linked to the outlawed PKK, according to media reports. The U.S. House of Representatives has officially passed President Donald Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending bill, paving the way for his first major legislative win of his second term. The vote 218 to 214 followed weeks of tough negotiations, with Republicans ultimately uniting behind what Trump calls his big beautiful bill. The legislation includes over $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, massive funding for border security and military programs, and controversial cuts to social programs like Medicaid and food stamps. Despite Democratic opposition and warnings over increasing national debt, Republicans pushed it through with minimal defections. Trump says the bill will turn the country into a rocket ship, describing it as a catalyst for economic growth. House Speaker Mike Johnson called it a defining moment, saying, "With one big beautiful bill, we make America stronger, safer, and more prosperous." The White House confirms President Trump will sign the bill into law at a ceremony on Friday, U.S. Independence Day, at 5 p.m. Listen in to what Trump has said.
Like the biggest bill of its kind ever signed, and it's going to make this country into a rocket ship.
Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Ross Feingold, he's a political analyst. He's joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Good to see you. What's your first reaction to this announcement that this big, beautiful bill is passed in legislative in U.S.?
It's a huge victory for President Trump. He won the election. The Republicans won control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. and you do what you can do with that power, which is to pass legislation that you want. Most notably, this extends the tax cuts that were President Trump's major achievement at the end of his first year in office in 2017. This includes a lot of money for border security, defense spending, and of course, it does include a substantial amount of cuts to the Medicaid program as well. It's very likely that the confidence of lower taxes, both personal as well as corporate taxes, the additional spending on border security and defense will be beneficial to the economy. The bill will have to be paid in the future when the tax cuts lead to lower government revenue and higher national debt. But that's not a problem that Trump is concerned about for today, or tomorrow he's concerned about his political victory.
And thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. President Donald Trump is celebrating what he calls a declaration of independence from national decline after signing the sweeping One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Speaking at a patriotic rally in Des Moines ahead of the July 4th, Trump has said the legislation delivers on all his key 2024 campaign promises. The bill slashes taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security benefits and unveils historic levels of spending cuts, tax cuts, and border security funding. It also includes $100 billion for immigration enforcement, $25 billion for the Golden Dome missile defense program, and billions more for air traffic modernization. Trump praised Republican congressional leaders while also joking about fireworks and illegal immigration, promising strong border enforcement with a touch of humor. He touted foreign policy gains, including a ceasefire in the Middle East and a peace deal in Central Africa, and claimed his second term is shaping up to surpass his first. Trump also slammed his political foes over last year's legal challenges, saying America is now on a winning streak. Listen in to what Trump has said.
Ordering like crazy, but inflation is dead. 401ks and retirement accounts just hit an all-time record high. Did I hear what I think I heard? But we've achieved the lowest level of illegal border crossings in U.S. history, 0 illegals. Think of it, we had 0. And as I said, and I'll say it again, I love it because I have never seen any country suffer. No country has ever. There's never, don't worry, it's only fireworks, I hope. Famous last words. My famous last words. Trump said, don't worry, it's only fireworks. You always have to think positive. I didn't like that sound either. You know? But last month, American-born workers gained 830,000 new jobs, a record. That's American-born.
Now we're back with our discussion on this topic. Ross Feingold, he's joining us live from Taipei. Ross, with 100 billion earmarked for immigration enforcement, does this bill meaningfully address the root causes of illegal immigration, or does it risk militarizing the border without delivering a comprehensive reform strategy, according to you?
Well, the root causes are problems in the countries from which immigrants depart from, countries in Central and South America that have economic, public safety, or other problems. But the money that will be spent on enforcement, along with the policies implemented by the Trump administration, are certainly going to make it more difficult for people to enter the United States, whether they're trying to enter illegally or even trying to enter legally and to claim asylum, where the Trump administration has made a lot of changes to implement to relevant regulations with regard to asylum claims, and that's been upheld by the courts. So the ultimate result here, and we already see that from the data, is that people entering the country across the southern border, the numbers are falling considerably. And with this additional funding, they will continue to fall more. Is that going to address the root causes, the issues of economic or public security problems in certain countries in Central America and South America? No, it doesn't address the root cause, but it certainly will be an impediment to people entering the United States along the United States southern border.
And also in this news, we saw that Trump cites a Middle East ceasefire and a Central African peace deal as proof of rising U.S. influence, given recent global instability. How much credit can this bill and the Trump administration realistically claim, and what benchmarks should we use to judge success of them?
The answer to your question is pretty simple. Are people still shooting at each other? So in Congo and Rwanda, I think the Trump administration could take credit for that peace agreement. The Trump administration was instrumental in bringing the parties together in Washington, D.C., where they entered into the agreement. We'll see how long it lasts, but if it does last for a long time, then I think the Trump administration rightly deserves credit for that. Same thing between Iran and Israel. It's clear that the Trump administration persuaded both sides to stop shooting missiles at each other, and it actually worked. And the Trump administration hasn't had success in Gaza or between Hamas and Israel, or in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. So it has a mixed scorecard, but they definitely have some victories that they could say that they helped implement peace agreements.
Thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. President Donald Trump says he made no progress with Vladimir Putin on ending the war in Ukraine. Speaking after their nearly hour-long call, Trump told reporters he's not happy with the ongoing conflict and said Russia is still unwilling to budge. Here's what the U.S. president has said.
It was a pretty long call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran, and we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine, and I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy.
According to the Kremlin, Putin told Trump that Moscow will not back down from its objectives, but it is open to continued negotiations. The Russian leader also briefed Trump on recent prisoner swaps with Kyiv and discussed other flashpoints like Iran and the broader Middle East. Now here's audio of Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov outlining what was discussed during that call.
Президент также сказал, что Россия будет добиваться поставленных целей, то есть устранения всем известных первопричин, приведших к нынешнему положению.
Now we are joined back by our guest Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live for this news. Ross, does Trump's public admission of no progress help or hurt Ukrainian morale and allied unity? Does it signal maybe transparency and resolve, or invite doubts about his ability to broker ceasefire?
That's a really interesting question, because on the one hand, Ukraine very much wants to have a ceasefire implemented, not necessarily a final deal, because it's so difficult for Ukraine and Russia to see eye to eye on what a final arrangement might be. But Ukraine certainly does want to pause in the fighting. But on the other hand, they don't want to sacrifice too much or give away too much just to achieve a ceasefire. And I think the leadership, the government, and the people of Ukraine are pretty unified, at least at the moment, that any arrangement they enter into with Russia, whether it's a temporary ceasefire or a long-term agreement, still has to achieve the political goals of the Ukrainian people. And I think also the Western European governments, to their credit, are still fairly unified about providing aid to Ukraine, whether that's financial aid or military equipment. And there's definitely some space between the United States and the Trump administration and the Western European countries on that issue. We even have the recent pause in the delivery of weapons to Ukraine. So on the one hand, Ukraine might be rooting for Trump to be able to persuade Putin to enter into a ceasefire agreement. But on the other hand, Ukraine, I think they're still internally fairly united, and they have the Western European countries' support to stay steadfast and continue to fight this war and recover the territory that they've lost. But it doesn't mean they're not willing to enter into a ceasefire. But again, it really depends on what the terms are.
Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. You will stay with us for our next news as well. French President Emmanuel Macron is pushing for a trade deal with the United States as soon as possible. Speaking during a visit to Roquefort in southern France, Macron said he wants a deal with the lowest possible tariffs that is both fair and firm. The deadline for an agreement set by President Donald Trump expires next Wednesday without a deal. Current tariffs could double or rise even higher. Macron warned that if the U.S. imposes tariffs, Europe will respond. He also hopes Europe's defense efforts and U.S. gas purchases will influence talks. Here's what the French president had to say.
Mais pour moi, le bon accord, c'est un accord qui est conclu le plus vite possible, avec les tarifs les plus bas possibles et qui doit être juste et ferme. C'est-à-dire que si malheureusement le choix américain est de mettre des tarifs sur nous, que ce soit compensé par une réponse de notre part qui incitera à démanteler tout ça.
Now we're joined back by our guest Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. With Trump's tariff clock running out next Wednesday, what bargaining chips, such as just the one that Macron mentioned, that everything on this is on the table, can U.S. defense also U.S. defense commitments, what we saw from earlier, NATO summit, can Macron realistically put it on the table without alienating any key European partners?
It's clear, at least from President Macron's remarks, that he is eager to reach a deal. He doesn't want to see punitive tariffs imposed on European and French exports to the United States. I think he's generally aligned with the other European leaders as well. None of them are eager for a trade war. They don't want to give away too much in a deal with the United States, but they've already committed to certain things, such as buying more U.S. weapons, buying more liquefied natural gas from the United States as well. They understand the reality that President Trump is going to be in office for the next 3.5 years. They might not like working with him. They may have had a better relationship with President Biden, but they do have to deal with the reality of President Trump's very tough negotiating positions when it comes to trade. And the Europeans are going to have to give away something. They're going to have to lower their tariffs on U.S. goods. They're going to have to change some of their market access rules. And that's the only way to reach an agreement. But I do think they're eager to reach an agreement. I think they're very, very concerned about a trade war, which could be damaging to their own agriculture and manufacturing sectors. Will they get it by July 9th? Hard to say. We're going into a holiday weekend in the United States. I don't think the U.S. negotiators are eager to work over a holiday weekend, and then there'll just be a few days next week. But we shouldn't eliminate the possibility that the Trump administration at the last minute might say, we're making progress towards a deal, so we'll extend the current pause on the implementation of the so-called Liberation Day tariffs.
Thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. President Donald Trump says he will start sending formal letters to trade partners beginning Friday, warning them of possible tariff action if deals aren't reached. This comes ahead of the July 9 deadline, after which higher tariff rates could snap back into place. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Trump will decide whether to extend trade talks beyond that deadline. Right now, the EU, Japan, and others face a 10% universal surtax. He confirmed a deal with Vietnam is finalized in principle and that the 20% tariff Trump announced won't stack on the existing levy. Bessent also met with his EU counterpart and said U.S. Trade Rep Jamieson Greer will keep negotiating through the weekend. On Japan, he cited domestic constraints ahead of their July 20th election. He warned that if countries don't move fast, rates may return to April 2nd levels, and made clear that Trump has the final say. Now we are going back to our discussion on this topic with Ross Feingold. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, a lot of countries are in pressure to reach a deal, and Japan heads to the polls on 20th July. The EU juggles internal squabbles, and Vietnam has just inked a deal in principle. How do these domestic timelines and pressures reshape each partner's bargaining power, according to you?
The negotiating partner or the trade partner, they have to deal with the reality that the United States government only has so much resources at one time to negotiate with other countries. So that's not necessarily a message that the United States doesn't want to reach a deal with these other countries. But between Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Greer, there's only so many people who can negotiate on behalf of the United States at any one time, and that makes it difficult for other trading partners to get the attention of the United States. Obviously, some countries are a priority, like Japan. Vietnam was certainly a priority, and there's an agreement in principle. The EU is clearly a priority as well. India has been a priority. Taiwan and South Korea seem to be priorities as well. But there are approximately 200 countries and territories that need to negotiate a deal with the United States, and it's just not realistic that all of them will have a deal in place by July 9th. So the reality is President Trump might decide to pause implementation for certain trading partners, and a good number of trading partners might see higher tariffs come July 9th.
Thank you, Ross Feingold, for staying with us and sharing your insight as a political analyst throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Looking at Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited kibbutz near Oz on Thursday, the community that suffered the most hostage losses in the October 7, 2023 Hamas attacks. Walking through ruins with his wife, Sarah Netanyahu, they met survivors and released hostages. He vowed to bring back all those still held in Gaza. Of the 251 kidnapped last year, 49 remain captive, 9 of them from near Oz. The Prime Minister called it a deep obligation to return them. Here's what the Israeli president had to say.
רעייתי שרה בקיבוץ ניר עוז מול מראות ההרס והחורבן והטבח עם חברי הקיבוץ, אלה ששרדו וגם אלה שחזרו מהשבי. אני מרגיש מחויבות עמוקה, קודם כל להבטיח חזרתם של כל חטופינו, כולם. עדיין יש 20 חיים ויש עוד חללים ואנחנו נחזיר.
Outside the kibbutz, protesters demanded immediate action. Many urged Netanyahu and President Trump to seal the deal to free the hostages. Some said the Israeli public is divided on the war and criticized ongoing policies. The message from demonstrators was clear: bring them home now. Here's what a protester had to say.
With the people of Nir Oz and to tell them that they're not alone. We're waiting for the 50 brothers and sisters who are still in Gaza to come back home, and we want them home now. And I'm here to say to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's the only guy who can seal the deal together with President Trump, bring them home now. They don't have time. We need them back home ASAP.
Now we are joined by Rohan Gunaratna for this discussion, international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Thank you, Rohan, for joining us today. Good to see you. Netanyahu says bringing home all 49 remaining hostages is a deep obligation. Beyond his rhetoric, what tangible levels does Israel still have to secure their release, and what timeline is it realistic? What timeline are we looking at?
There is going to be a ceasefire that is going to take place in the coming week. And with that ceasefire, there will be a very significant gain because President Trump himself is involved in it. In fact, there will be discussions between both the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States next week in Washington, D.C., with the support of Qatar and Egypt, and a very significant pressure on the part of Hamas. In return, there will be release of some Palestinian prisoners, some relocation of Israeli troops in Gaza, and also discussion on what is going to happen in Gaza. That is, whether there is going to be a post-Hamas governance model, especially where Hamas will release all the hostages, disarm and also will move out of Gaza. So I believe that it's a very significant move initiated by the President of the United States. And we are all hopeful that will happen, because in this day and age, no one should be taking hostages, no one should be mounting terrorist attacks. The devastating war in Gaza was caused by the October 7th, 2023 attack by Hamas. And naturally, Hamas should now come to reality the destruction and the devastation it has caused in Gaza.
Thank you, Rohan, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us for our next news. U.S. President Donald Trump says ensuring the safety of Gazans is now a top priority as he prepares to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu next week. Speaking to reporters on Thursday, Trump said, quote, "I want to see safety for the people of Gaza. They've gone through hell." His comments come as Washington intensifies efforts to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Earlier this year, Trump floated the idea of a temporary U.S. administration of Gaza. When asked if he still backed that plan, Trump shifted to focus to humanitarian concerns, saying safety for Gazans is now, more importantly, the goal. Let's take a listen to what Trump has said.
People of Gaza are safe, more important. I want to see safety for the people of Gaza. They've gone through hell. Thank you very much.
Now we're back, joined by for this discussion, our guest Rohan Gunaratna. He's an international affairs expert. Thank you, Rohan, for staying with us. Now, Trump has shelved his earlier idea of a temporary U.S. administered ceasefire or administration in Gaza Strip, but now stresses that safety for Gazans is the overriding goal. Does this pivot signal a genuine policy shift or simply rebranding? And what metrics would prove the difference on the ground within, let's say, 30 days?
Trump wants to change the Middle East, and Trump knows that for him to have the support of the Arab countries in the Middle East and the Muslim countries of the world, he must take a stand where Gazans are also protected, Palestinians are also protected. And what is important is that he has moved away from his initial proposal of creating a Riviera in Gaza to now building an entity in Gaza where that doesn't pose a threat to Israel, and also maintains peace and will have prosperity. That is why I think that Trump is realistic, and it is very important for the world to understand that he is committed to restoring peace, security, and stability in the Middle East.
Thank you, Rohan, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. The Israeli army has denied reports of mass casualties at a Gaza aid distribution center. Army spokesman Efi Defrin called the claims lies and accused Hamas of spreading propaganda to block humanitarian aid. He said the military is targeting terror infrastructure while maintaining control on the ground. Defrin also said the army would present future plans to Israel's political leadership as operations continue to bring hostages home and dismantle Hamas rule. The comments come amid global concerns over civilian impact in Gaza as the war pushes on. The IDF insists its goals remain hostage return and eliminating Hamas control. Here's what the Israeli army spokesperson had to say.
הדיווחים על היקף ההרוגים הנרחב, לכאורה, במתחמי החלוקה הם שקרים. זוהי תעמולה נוספת של ארגון הטרור חמאס, כחלק מתוכניתו הרחבה לפגיעה בחלוקת הסיוע. אנחנו משמידים את תשתיות הטרור באופן שיטתי ויסודי, תוך שמירה על אחיזה יציבה בשטח. אנחנו מייצרים הישגים לטווח ארוך, ומונעים את חזרת חמאס לבסיסי כוחו.
Now we are joined back by our guest Rohan Gunaratna, he's an international affairs expert. Thank you, Rohan. for staying with us. With the IDF branding casualty claims as lies and propaganda, and now Hamas accusing Israel of blocking aid, what independent mechanisms or UN investigators like NGO field reports can reliably cut through the fog of war and establish what actually happened at the distribution center?
You're very good in what you just now mentioned. What is important is to develop a very clear picture of what is happening. At this point, I can assure you, looking at the deaths, about a few hundred people have died in the food distribution centers. Who has conducted those attacks? Certainly the Israeli military will not deliberately kill civilians unless there's a very real threat to Israeli troops or to the lines of control that Israel has established. We are seeing that other than Hamas, Islamic Jihad and other terrorist groups, there are also tribes and other organizations operating there. So there should be an independent mechanism to verify how the civilians died and whether the figures mentioned by the Ministry of Health of Gaza is accurate, because the Ministry of Health is controlled by Hamas, and Hamas is notorious for propagating false numbers. So there should be an independent mechanism to verify and validate that information. One also must never forget that Hamas has a reputation of hiding behind churches, mosques, schools, and hospitals, and also building an underground city under buildings that are occupied by civilians. So all these civilian deaths, Hamas has to take the responsibility for it.
Thank you, Rohan, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay in the region. U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran is ready to talk and he's open to meeting Iranian officials if necessary. Speaking before a rally in Iowa, Trump said, "We are not looking to hurt them. We want them to be a country again." His comments come as Washington unveils fresh sanctions on Iran's oil sector, the first since a U.S.-brokered ceasefire ended a 12-day conflict between Iran and Israel. Let's listen into what Trump has said.
And we just did a really great job. And then, of course, you cap it off with the hit, the perfect hit in Iran, where they were talking awfully badly, you know, death to America, death to Israel. They were talking awfully badly, and they're not talking badly anymore, to be honest with you. And we might even meet with them and see if they want to meet. They want to meet, and we'll see if we can do something. But they want to meet. I think they want to meet very badly.
The new measures target companies and individuals accused of disguising Iranian oil exports, including a UAE-based firm linked to an Iraqi businessman. Meanwhile, tensions continue to rise over Iran's nuclear program. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran remains committed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but will now channel IAEA cooperation through its Supreme National Security Council. The IAEA says it's still waiting for clarity. Washington, however, is warning Tehran to resume full cooperation, the State Department calling Iran's move unacceptable and accusing it of stockpiling uranium without a peaceful purpose. Iran insists the IAEA has been biased and silent over Israel's airstrikes on its nuclear sites. Now we're joined back with our guest discussion on this, Rohan Gunaratna. He's joining us live from Singapore. Thank you, Rohan, for staying with us. After a brief Iran-Israel war and a U.S.-brokered truce, what incentives, security guarantees, face sanctions relief could realistically bring Iran back to the table, and how might Israel and Gulf allies react to direct U.S.-Iran dialogue?
The United States and other countries will impose sanctions on Iran because Iran is still determined to build a nuclear weapons capability. The recent operations in Iran by Israel and the United States clearly demonstrated that Iran was not building its nuclear capability for peaceful purposes. In fact, since the ceasefire, I can share with you, based on satellite imagery, Iran has started to restore its those nuclear sites that were damaged. Only 3 sites were severely damaged, but there are a total of about 20 sites. Iran also should cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency. If Iran is not going to do that, Israel is likely to strike again, and also the United States is likely to strike again. Iran has no option at this point to abandon its nuclear weapons program and cooperate with the international community.
Thank you, Rohan, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Russian President Vladimir Putin is urging diplomacy in the Middle East as tensions remain high following the Iran-Israel conflict. In a call with U.S. President Donald Trump, Putin stressed that all disputes in the region, including the Iran crisis, must be resolved through political and diplomatic means. The Kremlin said Putin reiterated Moscow's position that conflicts should not escalate through military action. The leader's call comes as the U.S. announces new sanctions on Iran's oil industry and as Washington warns Tehran over its decision to curb IAEA inspections. Iran, however, insists it remains committed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and that its cooperation with the IAEA will continue, but only through its Supreme National Security Council. The ceasefire brokered by the U.S. has held for now, but regional tensions remain on the edge. Now we are joined back with our guest Rohan Ratna. Thank you, Rohan, for staying with us. Now, Putin calls for political solutions while Washington tightens oil sanctions. Do these parallel tracks bolster stability or set up a clash of strategies here? And which regional actors are likely to seize on Moscow's line?
Asuma, we have seen that President Putin's conversation with President Trump has had a movement in a direction of negotiation, of arbitration, and of mediation. So I think that it's a very good strategy, because whatever militarily that has happened between the US and Iran and Israel and Iran, at the end of the day, it must translate into strategic and political gains, diplomatic gains. So I believe that this is the time for the United States, for China, for Russia, and even Israel to work to have a discussion, a dialogue with Iran, how Iran should move forward. But certainly Iran should stop sponsoring terrorism globally, should cease support for its proxies, and also should abandon the idea of having a nuclear weapons program. Looking at Iran's history, Iran should never be permitted to build a nuclear weapons capability, because it has played a very decisive role funding and supporting extremist and terrorist groups.
Thank you, Rohan, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay in the region. Tensions between Iran and the United States may be heading towards a new diplomatic window if Washington gives assurances it won't resort to military action. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Majid Takht Rawanchi says Tehran remains open to diplomacy, but demands guarantees from the U.S. that force won't be used while talks are underway. This comes amid reports that U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff could meet Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Oslo next week, though neither side has confirmed it. Nuclear talks between the two countries stalled in June, just before Israel launched a 12-day military campaign targeting Iran's nuclear sites, killing hundreds, including top scientists. The U.S. joined that offensive with strikes on 3 major Iranian nuclear facilities. Escalating tensions further. Despite the ceasefire reached on June 24th, deep divisions remain, especially over uranium enrichment. Tehran says it will not negotiate that right, insisting its program remains peaceful. Now we go back to our discussion with Rohan Gunaratna. Thank you, Rohan, for staying with us. Now we see that after joint US-Israeli strikes last month, mutual mistrust is sky high. What role can maybe European mediators or other mediators like Oman and Qatar play in bridging gaps? And is this a limited talks for de-escalation framework more realistic than a full nuclear accord right now?
The Arab countries in the Gulf, they are determined that peace is restored, because the war between Israel and Iran created so much of instability. The US strikes created so much of instability in the short term, but in the long term, it is going to create peace in the region, because the status quo should not be maintained. If it is maintained, there will be instability, because Iran supported Hamas that staged the October 7th, 2023 attack. Iran was continuing to enrich uranium to build a bomb. So what is important is, at this point, now that Iran is willing to talk, the Europeans, the Arab countries, and the United States, and also Israel, should work together to create a coalition of partners and bring Iran out of this mindset of violence and extremism, constantly saying death to Israel, death to America, to move away from that and to create peace. Sooner or later, Iran's clerical rule will have to end, because the Iranian people themselves do not want that Ayatollah's rule. They want a stable Iran, they want a secular Iran, and they want an Iran recognized by the international community. So I believe that these talks are essential, they are vital, they are timely, and also we should all bless the peacemakers, because through war, we cannot restore harmony in the region. We cannot restore permanent peace in the region. What is important is to move to a new phase of dialogue and discussion and negotiations.
Thank you very much, Rohan Gunaratna, for joining us and sharing your insight as an international affairs expert throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. The U.S. immigration enforcement is set as the Congress has approved a budget bill allocating over $150 billion to President Donald Trump's mass deportation efforts. This funding, expected to be signed into law by Friday, will primarily support the Department of Homeland Security and its enforcement arms, including immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection. This enables heightened border security and mass deportations. Critics argue it will lead to family separations and intensified racial profiling, while supporters claim it's essential to addressing illegal immigration. Boeing has landed a $2.8 billion U.S. contract to develop 2 advanced satellites for the Evolved Strategic Satellite Communications program. The deal includes options for 2 additional satellites. Boeing is set to deliver the first satellite by 2031, with the technology offering persistent, secure communication coverage for strategic warfighters worldwide. Once deployed in geostationary orbit, this contract marks a significant step in strengthening the U.S. defense infrastructure. NVIDIA stock surged 1.3% on Thursday, closing at a record high and bringing the company closer to surpassing Apple as the most valuable company in history. By the close of trading, the company's market cap reached $3.89 trillion, narrowly falling short of Apple's record high of $3.915 trillion. Set in late 2024. NVIDIA's growth has been fueled by strong earnings and high demand for its AI chips, even amid US restrictions on Chinese use of its products. The stock is up over 19% in 2025, marking a remarkable recovery from a rocky start to the year. United Airlines and JetBlue Airways are urging the U.S. Transportation Department to dismiss a complaint from Spirit Airlines about their proposed Blue Sky partnership. The two airlines argued that the deal, which involves United accessing JetBlue slots at JFK and exchanging flight timings at Newark, will not harm competition. Spirit has criticized the partnership, claiming it would make JetBlue a vassal of United and put pressure on smaller carriers. This move follows JetBlue's failed merger with Spirit and its ongoing search for profitable partnerships after the pandemic. Wall Street closed at a record high on Thursday, with NVIDIA inching closer to a $4 trillion valuation and a stronger than expected U.S. jobs report, boosting investor confidence. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq both hit all-time highs, marking a third consecutive week of gains. The Dow rose 0.77%, nearing its own record. June's job report showed 147,000 new jobs and a drop in unemployment to 4.1%, easing concerns about a rate cut this month. Meanwhile, President Trump's $3.4 trillion tax cut and spending bill was approved by the House. Retail investors fueled by the rally, focusing on positive economic data despite inflation concerns. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.